Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today's podcast will try to understand how the infrastructure investment we have planned across the UK can actually be turned into better, sustainable outcomes for communities. Now, to tackle this hugely important issue, my guest today is Professor Jim Hall, the 160th President of the Institution of Civil Engineers, Professor of Climate and Environmental Risks at the University of Oxford, and a Commissioner for the soon-to-be wound down, or is it perhaps wound on, National Infrastructure Commission. Now, in his inaugural speech to the ICE, Jim rightly pointed out that the infrastructure civil engineers provide is central to the sustainable development of our society. Yet, he added that around the world, governments continually struggle to provide those much-needed infrastructure services. So the question is why? And of course, how can infrastructure professionals start to really move the dial when it comes to ensuring that for all the investment and enthusiasm, we're getting the right sustainable outcomes? That is, the social, economic and environmental outcomes from the infrastructure systems we already have in place, but also from the new ones that are slated to be built as part of the ongoing global drive towards economic and social growth. And make no mistake, there are some huge opportunities ahead, but there are also some huge challenges, not least in a world increasingly led by climate change skeptics and vested corporate interests. Well, let's find out what more the profession can do by chatting to an internationally recognised expert in strategic infrastructure planning. Jim, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Hello, Anthony. Great to be here.
Great. Well, Jim, in your presidential address to the ICE last November, you warned that our current underperforming, over-expensive infrastructure is failing to create the infrastructure systems needed for a sustainable future. So why do you say that? I mean, are we simply building too many of the wrong things in the wrong places and perhaps even in the wrong ways?
I wasn't making a general observation there about infrastructure. I think to claim that all of our infrastructure is underperforming and over-expensive is unfair. The point I was making in the presidential address was that we inevitably face compromises, trade-offs in deciding what infrastructure to do, how to allocate our scarce resources, and we can get more of what we want if we are able to tackle the inefficiencies in some of what's going on in infrastructure and to innovate. I mean, we have to innovate because we know we're in a time when resources are scarce and yet our infrastructure needs are very, very significant. We're going to talk about a number of those during this podcast, I'm sure. So we've really got to look at ways in which we can drive productivity within our industry and within the systems that we have so that we can have more of what we want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, put it like that, Jim, there's never been a better time to be in infrastructure because there's no question, that the government in the UK, the governments globally have placed infrastructure investment, both public and private investment, firmly at the heart of the drive for growth. However, I mean, you also highlighted that the continued stop-start investment culture and lack of ongoing maintenance from what we already built was still holding us back. I mean, to be fair, it's not really a new problem, but do you see this moment of enthusiasm and a global drive to get behind infrastructure? Do you think this is a moment for change?
I think in this country, of course, you've made the point that changing things about infrastructure, it's very difficult to do things very quickly just because of the life cycle of infrastructure projects. But we've been through a particular phase with attention to stop-start, in particular in terms of Birmingham to Manchester part of HS2 being cancelled, and particular concerns in relation to planning delays. The National Infrastructure Commission reported on that. Time for major infrastructure projects planning going from 2.5 years to 4 years.
Yeah.
So, and some of that is to do with some quite basic kind of machinery of government system, just the not being enough planning inspectors, the national policy statements not being kept up to date or consistent with one another. statutory consultees not having enough resources. There are actually a bunch of things there which can be fixed and are being fixed. Some of this was going on at the tail end of
Yeah.
the last government. I don't think one can just say, oh, this is all going to take far too long. There are a few quick fixes which could make a significant difference. Another one is in relation to queuing for energy connections and that whole
Yeah.
queuing system for new people getting connected up, new supplies getting connected up. The reforms going on, and that's something that can be fixed.
A lot of which, of course, has been tackled and highlighted by the National Infrastructure Commission. And you've been a commissioner there since April 2022. And I spoke at length before Christmas to outgoing chairman Sir John Armitt about its future direction. And we'll come back to perhaps your role in a moment. But in general, I mean, how would you say that the National Infrastructure Commission really has contributed to creating this culture of delivering increasingly sustainable infrastructure for the UK?
The NIC was created with a mandate to create a long-term vision for infrastructure. I think that is incredibly important. And because it's spanned across government, it's been there to navigate the conflicting needs and priorities of infrastructure. It's had a mandate to look at the role of infrastructure in the economy, infrastructure for people, and in particular the affordability of infrastructure, questions around the environment and resilience. And I should underline we really chew over those things in the Commission very carefully. Whereas there is a bit of a tendency, if one carves infrastructure out, everyone wants more of their bit. And they're maybe less concerned about who pays for it. Whereas the NIC needs to get the whole lot on the table at the same time and kind of navigate those trade-offs across the big picture. I should say also that I say the NIC has had a few very significant successes, things which have been very kind of rapidly taken on board as becoming part of government policy. If we think the water-related work, the establishment of drought resilience standards, which have become de facto standards now within the latest round of water resource plans, driving a stake through the heart of the use of hydrogen for domestic heating, saying that basically domestic heating is going to be done with heat pumps and heat networks in a low carbon future. These are things that the NIC has got in the bag.
Yeah, I mean, and many of which, as you refer to the hydrogen one, it hasn't shied away from controversial stuff, which is, I suppose, is what is needed. And I suppose that was then, and things are going to change. And perhaps we'll talk a bit more about, the future role of, what is, NISTA, the successor to the National Infrastructure Commission. But we also discussed with Sir John that the good news that the Labour government has great infrastructure aspirations and big plans to reform the planning system, and it appears highly committed to driving the UK towards a low carbon future. I say appears, maybe get your view on how you see the reality, because how confident are you that the aspiration set out by this government is correct but also can be delivered?
Yeah, I think, as you say, the commitment to sorting out and speeding up planning is absolutely right. We'll come on to the decarbonisation of the power sector, but that's clearly a fundamental step in terms of getting towards net zero and providing energy security. So in that sense, I think the priorities are right. The discussion around how infrastructure contributes to economic growth, the Chancellor has provided the headroom for more investment in infrastructure, but we haven't yet seen the complete kind of rationale and set of priorities in terms of how they see the connect up between infrastructure and growth.
I mean, clearly, the inauguration of President Trump this month in the US, I mean, it can hardly be described as a step forward in terms of tackling global climate change. I mean, are you worried?
Yes, I think having someone who's apparently climate skeptic, who is committed to permitting more drilling for fossil fuels, these are things that the world doesn't need right now. I mean, we are where we are, and I'm a pragmatist. We're all kind of clutching at straws in terms of looking for the bright sides of this. The previous Trump administration was not as destructive as some people had feared, though I have to say, knowing people who work on climate science in the administration, they found it extremely hard just to talk about science in an open and honest way. There are other kind of points of light in the sense that many of the US states are still extremely committed, and just the economics of renewable energy, of wind and solar in the US many parts of the US are incredibly good places to put wind and solar.
Yeah, that's a lot of investment going in. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you have got this year, Jim, is a huge presidential platform from the Global Institution of Civil Engineers. So let's dig in a bit more around some of the themes of your year, and particularly around, driving towards, as you put it, a more sustainable future. I mean, it starts with your call for more knowledge sharing. You say we need to get better at drilling down into the incredible expertise within our membership and helping busy people to share their knowledge in a more efficient way. I mean, that's, of course, the essence of institutions right back from the coffee shops of 200 years ago. I mean, is it not happening enough now?
You're absolutely right. That was what the institution started for, was for people to share knowledge, and that's what it's always been about. But the world is always changing, and it's changing in very significant ways. There's the changing nature of knowledge, so the way in which we all access our knowledge, search engines, AI, is changing dramatically. The changing nature of volunteering. The IC depends on the generosity of its members and friends with time. And there's a shift in society in that sense. And in particular, post-pandemic, the changing nature of the way in which people get together. The IC has seen a drop-off in attendance in person at evening meetings, which have always been the kind of bread and butter of ICE.
I suppose particularly if you want to get the young next generation in there rather than just the people who are retired and have got the more time.
Yeah, absolutely. On the other hand, I should say, I mean, the ICE has run a couple of conferences, and people are willing to and want to turn out for 2 or 3 days and have a dinner and meet with each other. So patterns of behavior are changing. What the ICE needs to get really better at is drilling down into the expertise of members. As you've said, a lot of this has depended on people showing up to committee meetings in person. I'm not sure the extent to which we can depend on that completely. So I've been thinking about how do we think of ways of getting experts to give 20 minutes of their time to really drill down into the people who know what they're talking about. And the thing is that the most knowledgeable people are always the busiest people. So how can we kind of find out, keep track of who they are and really get efficient at digging into their brains?
Yeah, which is why it's an absolute pleasure to grab a few minutes of your time, Jim, because, but here we are, you're in Italy, I'm in London, and the technology does make it possible now to carve out those small amounts of time, I suppose, and that's a good thing. I mean, you've also been a a great supporter at the IC and, of course, the NIC of the need for design champions. I mean, how do you see design champions really fitting into the delivery process of infrastructure, and how do they create more sustainable outcomes?
Well, I worry about good engineering design and expertise becoming a bit downgraded in the project delivery process. There's lots of focus on cost and time and management, and that is absolutely right. But actually, the infrastructure that we're building and leaving for the world depends upon great design. And if you can get the design right, then that often kind of helps to address your cost and time problems as well. And in particular, if we look at major projects which have not gone well, some of the issues there, I think, come down to insufficient attention to upfront conceptual design, to really kind of working out what are the trade-offs between performance and cost before we start making decisions that get locked in, and thinking really creatively about what the possible solutions are up front before it's too late.
So this is way beyond whether or not the stuff falls down or stands up. This is way beyond whether, what colour it is and what it looks like. This is basically the fundamentals of why we're doing this.
Yeah, and it's to do with engineering creativity. And I think in particular for major projects, one ends up with vast numbers of people working on, of course, on designing those projects. But actually, there needs to be more space for real kind of genius up front by a much smaller number of people who can actually work out what the essence of a good solution is.
Yeah. You've talked about the need to communicate what we're up to internally and share messages internally. But you also talk about the need to boost communication and the importance of infrastructure externally. The wider our reach, you say, the stronger our partnerships around the world, the better the world is going to be. Who do you see as the key audience that we need to get this message across to? Is it the man in the street, or is it the politicians, or is it all of them?
It is all of them. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of how we have the conversations about infrastructure with the general public. I think on the NIC, we do our best to do a fair bit of consultation and meeting a wide range of people. And you give them an opportunity to talk about infrastructure, and they are very interested in it. But it's kind of sometimes really quite surprising and very interesting the ways in which those conversations are framed. So I think there's more to do there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about you and your approach to this role, Jim, because you're the 160th president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And simultaneously a professor of climate and environmental risks at the University of Oxford, where you've worked for 14 years. So as an academic, what makes your approach to the role of president, and I suppose the role of a commissioner at the NIC, what makes it different from that, say, of a working professional engineer?
Well, the first thing I'd say, that there were a few, and for me, very significant years at the start of my career in which I was a practical engineer. I was actually sponsored by Taylor Woodrow at university. I worked for them for a year, and in the vacations in their soils lab and at Sellafield.
Right.
And then I worked for a couple of years in Guyana on flood and coast protection projects, and then I came back and spent a few years at HR Wallingford.
So you've done the hard yards. So you got the soil under your fingernails. That's
right, and it's at that point that I became chartered as a civil engineer. I mean, academia has many really kind of significant hooks into our profession, doesn't it? We teach, so we teach the next generation, and we have a close relationship with the ICE and the other members of the Joint Board of Engineering Moderators in that context. And we're researchers and innovators in the universities. And I think the relationship between the profession and the universities is really good at a kind of education and membership level. I think we should be there are more mutual benefits to be had in relation to research and innovation. I think the links between the universities and the ICE should be stronger in that
Yeah,
context.
yeah. Well, as is, I mean, your research, which specialises on risk analysis for water resource systems, flooding and coastal engineering infrastructure systems, and adaptation to climate change. And you're a member of the UK Independent Committee on Climate Change Adaptation from 2009 to 2019. I mean, clearly this whole area of adaptation and adapting to this new world is hugely important, and there's a huge amount of work to do. Are we getting better at it? I mean, you look in the news this week, we're still seeing flooding, we're still seeing communities devastated, but are we getting better?
Yes, we are getting better at it. I mean, also in the news just before Christmas was the Environment Agency coming out with their new National Flood Risk Assessment. That was a tremendous piece of modelling to understand flood risks in this country much better than we have done previously. We mentioned water in relation to the National Infrastructure Commission's work, and there's a new set of water resource management plans which are looking into the future, understanding climate uncertainties much better
Yeah,
than we have done previously. So there is progress, but there is still, well, the main question is the progress enough to keep up with the changing scale of the
yeah,
challenge? And we're not as well able to answer that question as we should do. We need to get a much better at measuring what's going on, measuring what are the benefits of adaptation that's going on at the moment, monitoring progress, and making sure that we are on
yeah.
track.
Well, I saw you interviewed recently where you said, I'm a civil engineer, but I'm also a family man. You know, you've got a wife, you've got 3 children, and a love for the outdoors. I mean, how does that shape your thinking and your passion for tackling climate change? I mean, do you think your kids will thank you or blame you for the state of the future state of the planet?
Well, the first thing that my wife and kids do is keep me down to earth, keep my feet on the ground.
Right.
They don't put up with any pretense, and they ask lots of straightforward and awkward questions, and that's very good for all of us, isn't it? In terms
Yeah.
of climate change, naturally, I am an optimist, and I'm made more optimistic by some of these tremendous transformations that are happening at the moment, in particular in relation to renewable energy, batteries, and a whole bunch of different technological innovations, which are going much faster, I think, than many people had predicted.
Yeah.
On the other hand, what we're seeing in relation to climate change is incredibly alarming. I'm, as you may have spotted, a mountaineer, and
Yeah.
anyone who goes up into the mountains will see the rate of retreat of mountain glaciers. And that's just one of the phenomena which we're observing all over the place. I mean, the increase in wildfires I also find incredibly distressing. So there are lots of things going on which really mean that we've got to keep going with dealing with the drivers of climate change.
Yeah, well, we're seeing wildfires spreading across Los Angeles at the moment, and of course, that's all very disturbing. You mentioned that away from work, you're a passionate mountaineer. You've climbed ice and rock in South America, Himalayas, Antarctica. I mean, you say you're an optimist. I mean, is that what draws you to such a potentially dangerous pastime?
I mean, I love the mountains. I love the process of climbing, which is completely absorbing and compelling. Um, yes, it is a risky part time, but I don't do it because it's risky. It's a mountaineering, like other aspects of my career and interests, is an exercise in risk management. there are lots of things one does which involves a clear objective, a degree of persistence, a need for adaptability.
Getting back to the world of infrastructure, government's promised this new 10-year national infrastructure strategy in the spring. And of course, the National Infrastructure Commission's second national infrastructure assessment should provide the underlying foundations for that strategy. What's your vision for that strategy? I mean, how do you see that strategy rolling out in terms of levels of detail, etc.?
You're right that the National Infrastructure Assessment provides a pretty good set of advice for the government when they're creating their 10-year National Infrastructure Strategy. What we need now is a clearer set of priorities in the light of the government's agenda. So a very kind of strong sense of direction of where the government wants to go with infrastructure. And that needs to be aligned with where the Chancellor thinks growth is going to come from in the economy. I think there's a strong recognition. I think it's the right recognition that there needs to be investment to achieve more growth. But there really needs to be a very kind of joined up understanding of what the priorities are. And just to make that kind of more specific, there are inevitable tensions in infrastructure strategy between, on the one hand, providing the infrastructure in the parts of the country with the greatest growth potential, in particular in places where growth is being held back by lack of infrastructure. We might think about power connections in West London or water in Cambridge. And on the other hand, the role that infrastructure has in enabling economic development in less economically active and less fast growing parts of the country. And that involves a political judgment, and that judgment needs to be made. We can't hang around on that. What I think you asked me, well, how specific should the strategy get? Time is short. The government has said they're going to produce this by the spring, though the spring is sometimes a bit of a movable feast. But I really want it to be as specific as possible. I'd like it to be quite spatial in order to answer some of these questions I've just talked about in terms of where infrastructure should go. Where are the greatest needs? Where are systems performing or not performing at the moment? So where's the infrastructure gap and what are the priorities to fill those gaps? I think the strategy needs to do all of that.
And of course, delivering on that strategy will fall to this new National Infrastructure Service Transformation Authority, which will be a coming together of the NIC and the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. And I suppose as a commissioner, I'm sure it's going to be on your radar. And so John Armitt, before Christmas, he described it as a change of direction away from simply making recommendations about the strategic direction towards actually getting more into delivery. I mean, is NISTA for you a positive step towards creating the right sustainable outcomes?
Yeah, the possibility and commitment now in NISTA to providing a much more end-to-end system, which goes from strategy into prioritization, delivering, monitoring performance, I think is very attractive. Being an advisor is all well and good, but there's certainly an appeal in terms of actually being there as part of driving performance and delivery. Of course, that doesn't mean that strategy is done. In the spring, when the 10-year strategy comes out, there'll still be a fair amount of unfinished business, I expect. And of course, the landscape is always changing, so strategy always needs updating, and strategy is a driver of delivery. So I think that's the attraction of NISTA, that it brings those pieces together.
Yeah. One of the things which we talk a lot about on this podcast actually, and it comes up in most conferences, is the role of data and digital systems, and transforming our approach to infrastructure design and management. You set up and now chair DAFNI, the UK Data and Analytics Facility for National Infrastructure. What does that do, and how do you see data really transforming the sector?
So DAFNI is a set of data infrastructures, hardware, software, to enable data sharing. That's a real challenge in the infrastructure sector. But if we're going to get more out of the performance of infrastructure, we need to crack that. And DAFNI helps to crack that by providing a secure environment. It also provides a platform for locating and sharing system models, system simulation models, for coupling those models so that we can build much more kind of system of systems perspectives of infrastructure.
Yeah. So it's really getting into the heart of the why we're actually doing this.
Yeah. And data and modeling, coming on to the next part of your question, really underpins kind of every aspect in the infrastructure lifecycle. It's absolutely central to the upstream planning and decision making. We've seen really great developments in the digitization of design with BIM. But we're going to see more and more of that, and more of a role of AI doing the more routine bits of design, and then passing that seamlessly into optimization of construction, and much more digital asset management.
Okay, well, just to round us out, Jim, I notice you also, you've got 6 future leaders to assist you in your role as IT president, and I suppose I hope that they will give you a better understanding of the challenges. But I mean, how do you see the next generation perhaps cutting through the hand-wringing and the procrastination and vested interests to actually get to a situation where, as a profession, we're affecting change?
Well, the president's future leaders, who you've just referred to, I think are a great system. Half a dozen young graduate engineers who join me on and a whole bunch of my presidential engagements, and I'm going to do some work with each of them, doing some deep dives into topics of interest, and indeed doing a few podcasts with them.
Great.
To talk about what they're interested in. I mean, I particularly value their input in that they provide a next generation's perspective on what the future is actually going to be like. Because I think we need to kind of think very hard about that, not just what we want from infrastructure, but how do we believe people are going to be accessing services, going about their jobs and their daily lives, and what does that mean in terms of the infrastructure systems of the future?
Sounds like there's another 6 people joining your kids and wife, keeping your feet to the fire.
Absolutely.
Well, lots to talk about, and a huge amounts of challenges, and a really exciting moment, Jim. So thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. I mean, there are some great opportunities and great challenges, as I said, but what keeps you positive in terms of meeting these goals? Is it your vision for the future that keeps you positive?
Yeah, as I say, I see a lot of positive things going on in the world at the moment. I think actually you referred to the future leaders, and I'm very positive about the young people who we're getting into the profession at the moment. They're incredibly motivated by these questions of sustainability. I think that's why many of them are becoming civil engineers, and the ICE is very good at retaining them, converting them into membership, and supporting them throughout their careers. I mean, I think lots of changes are happening, not just now in terms of climate in terms of the uptake of technology and the transformation of our industry.
Well, it's definitely some kind of definitely a symbiotic relationship going on there. I'm sure that you're going to be learning huge amounts from them, and they definitely will be learning a lot from you, Jim. So, really important set of issues to discuss today, and thanks so much for spending time with me. Really interesting, very interesting year you've got ahead of you. So, thanks for joining me on the Infrastructure Podcast today.
Great to chat to you. Thank you, Anthony.
Well, thanks, Jim. That's all we've got time for today, but we have much more lined up and ready for the Infrastructure Podcast throughout 2025. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website. That's www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and share. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks again to Jim, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.